great to be here with you all tonight virtually. I hope the guacamole is good. I hear it's good. And that, we can have a great experience, a great conversation tonight. It's a great topic. I do a lot of speaking in a lot of different environments. And when Brooke and the team at Floyd brought me this invitation, I just thought, wow, this is a great topic for a group of, busy, successful business people and their significant others. And so I'm just excited to share this with you tonight. I do have 5 kids under the age of 11, 4 boys and a girl. Interestingly, I wrote the book Building Better Families about 7 years before I got married and had kids myself. I have often been asked, now that you have 5 kids, would you go back and change the book? And the answer is actually no. I've done that exercise. I've gone back and taken a look at it, and it isn't. But what I do know is that it's harder to live the book than I thought it was when I wrote the book. And we'll talk about that tonight. I guess the first question I'd put to you is like, how are you? How's life? How are you doing? These questions we ask each other, with great regularity. It's usually part of small talk, and we don't necessarily, listen for an answer or look for an answer. It's just sort of a, yeah, fine, or good, or could be better, or these sorts of things. But I think it is healthy for us from time to time to step back from who we are and where we are and what we're doing and take another look and just to pause and say, okay, how are you? Because before you're a mother or a father, before you are a husband or a wife, before you're a son or a daughter, before you're a business owner, a business leader, you're a human being. You're an individual person. And I think one of the things that parents forget is that, okay? Before you're a mom, before you're a dad, before you're anything else, you are an individual human being. And you're an individual human being with needs and dreams and fears and responsibilities and all that goes with that. And, and if we lose that perspective for too long, things do begin to spiral in our lives or, get sort of out of alignment. And then we do feel like we're driving a car that is out of alignment, which is both very unsafe and very scary. If you've ever driven a car that is seriously out of alignment. And so I think the first question we have to ask ourselves is, how are we doing? I have a philosophy of life. Most people have one, whether they've, written it down or not. My philosophy of life is that the meaning of life is that you are here to become the best version of yourself. I have used this philosophy to talk to people of all ages, of all backgrounds, of all religions, of all philosophies. And it is why I have focused my work on this in particular philosophy, because it is universal. You're here to become the best version of yourself. If you ask parents, hey, what do you want for your kids? If you say to parents, what's your dream for your kids? Parents say, I want my kids to become the best version of themselves. They might not use that phrase. They might not use that language. But if you ask a parent, tell me about your dreams for your child. Tell me about the kind of life you want your child to live. As they begin to unpack it, you realize, yeah, what they want is what we want as parents is we want our children to become the best version of themselves. And so, needless to say, if we are not on that journey ourselves, then we will struggle to, help our children make that journey. And there are many, many obstacles to making that journey, both individually, as a married couple, and, for your kids, and as a family. So how do we make that journey? I think the number one thing is you need to have a common purpose. People will say, oh, what makes a great relationship? Common interest? No. Why? Because our interests change. common interests are nice, but they're sort of a luxury item in a relationship. You know, you have common interests, you know, that's great, but over your lifetime, your interests change. And if your relationship is founded only on your common interests, or if that is the most important thing in your relationship, as your common interests change, then your relationship will change, and not necessarily for the better, especially if your interests begin to diverge. Common interests are good, they're great, but they're sort of a luxury item. So what is the foundation of a great relationship? Well, the foundation is common purpose, you know, is agreeing, okay, what is the purpose of this relationship? You know, in my book, The 7 Levels of Intimacy, which is about primary relationships, both in dating and in marriage, you know, I present the point that, you know, in a primary relationship, I'm here to help you become the best version of yourself, and you're here to help me become the best version of myself. And it's critically important that we have this common purpose, because we live in a world of radical change, and relationships are a universe of, I mean, just constant change. And we talk a lot about change in our culture at the moment. But the truth that often gets neglected, the truth that often gets overlooked, is the fact that it's what's unchanging that allows you to make sense of the change. Okay? It's what's unchanging that allows you to make sense of the change. So you're out on the ocean, you're sailing a yacht. It's what's unchanging that allows you to make sense of whatever happens out there, and what's unchanging is the North Star. And so that North Star has been used by navigators throughout history. Why? Because it allows them to make sense of everything. And we need that in our relationships, and our kids need that desperately, you know? And so when a couple can say, okay, yeah, the purpose of our relationship is to help each other become the best version of ourselves, that may sound like a little thing. It may sound like a simple thing, but it isn't. I mean, it's a seismic shift into meaning, into purpose. And where it has most impact is when we argue, okay? When we argue, this is common purpose is most important, is most valuable when we disagree. And we're going to disagree. You know, you've got some people who will say, oh, a great relationship is one that, you know, where people never have arguments. No, that isn't a great relationship. That's a dishonest relationship. The reality is we disagree with each other. A great relationship isn't one without conflict. A great relationship is one with healthy conflict. And the most difficult thing to learn in a marriage is how to have healthy conflict. And the most difficult thing to learn with our children is how to have healthy conflict. And so we talk about healthy conflict. We have a desire for healthy conflict, but the reality is that only one thing makes healthy conflict possible. And that is common unchanging purpose. Okay. If you say to me, okay, I'm going to help you become the best version of yourself. And I say to you, okay, I'm going to help you become the best version of yourself. And we say, this is going to be the common unchanging purpose of our relationship. Now, when we have an argument, we can argue in relation to that. Okay, when we have an argument, you can say, well, I think this thing will help us become the best version of ourselves because of this and that and this, you know, or no, I think this other thing will help us become the best version of ourselves for this reason or that reason. The beautiful thing about this argument is that we are now arguing for something rather than arguing against each other. And again, it seems like a subtle difference, but it isn't. This is the whole ball game when it comes to healthy conflict. Okay. When I say, I think we should do this because it'll help us become the best version of ourselves, that's very, very different to me saying, I think we should do this because this is what I want to do. And it's very, very different when you say to me, well, you know, I think we should do that because that'll help us become the best version of ourselves versus I just want to do that. So let's do that. How we argue determines the destiny of most relationships. Okay. Learning to argue in a healthy way is one of the most beautiful gifts we can give to our partner. And teaching our children how to have healthy conflict is a real gift. Okay. It's a phenomenal gift to give our children as they go out into the world, because it allows them to have courageous conversations. It allows them to have the difficult conversations that most people spend the first half of their life shying away from, ignoring, avoiding, and all that sort of stuff. And so the beginning of building, a great family, raising amazing children is purpose, and the purpose of a relationship, that always comes before the children. Purpose of the relationship is to help each other become the best version of themselves. And then when the kids come along, the purpose of the family is to help each other become the best version of ourselves. And so when your children come to you and say, can I do this? Or can I have that? There's a few ways to deal with that. You can say yes, you can say no. You can say, let me think about it. You can say, will it help you become the best version of yourself? And interestingly, they know instantly. Okay, even if they've never heard the phrase before, and a little child comes to you 4, 5, 6 years old and says, Mummy, can I do this? And you ask that child, will that help you become the best version of yourself? The child knows. Okay, why? Because this dream is already within us. This dream to become the best version of ourselves is already within us. We're not trying to force it on anybody. We're not trying to impose it on anybody. It's already in people, And so as parents, you're the primary educators of your children. Okay, primary educators. There won't be many educators in the life of your children, but you're the primary educators of your children. And as we try to teach our children about themselves, about life, about how to make choices, how to make decisions, there are many things that will be helpful. There are many things that will be useful, but there's nothing like having an anchor that we can return to. Again, it's what's unchanging that allows us to make sense of the change. There's nothing that's going to happen in your child's life that you cannot have a conversation with them about in relation to the concept of, hey, I'm your dad and I want you to become the best version of yourself. Mom, why are you being like that? Well, the reason I'm being like this is because I really love you. And, my job as your parent is to help you become the best version of yourself. And I'm committed to my job as your parent, But what I think is very important to understand as educators, okay, as primary educators of your children, is the actual concept of education, which has been absolutely polluted in our current culture. The word education comes from a Latin verb, educare, which means to draw out, okay? Means to draw out. So education is about drawing something out of a person. It's not about putting something into a person, okay? All of modern education focuses on imposing information, knowledge on a person so that they can go out and play some useful role, as we imagine it, in society. But the original intention of and the vision of education was that it would draw out things in a person, that it would draw out the best version of ourselves at a macro level, but in more nuanced levels, it would draw out, okay, what are we good at? What is our personality like? What does our personality lend itself to? What sort of work, life, vocation, career does our personality lend itself to? Is it best suited to? What are we best suited to spend our time, all of these many, many hours that we spend working doing? And so you're going to have very difficult times with your children. There are going to be times when you literally want to tear your hair out in this quest to help them become the best version of themselves. But at every moment along that journey, it's critically important that you understand that the dream is already within them. You're not trying to impose it upon them. Okay. Yes, you have the dream. You dream of them becoming the best version of themselves, but the dream is inside them as well. You don't have to force it on them. You don't have to impose it on them. You do have to work out how to draw it out, how to encourage it, how to raise it up within them and and draw it out of them. And that's difficult, you know? And we talk about that as we get deeper into this. But as an absolute foundation, common unchanging purpose, I'm here to help you become the best version of yourself. You're here to help me become the best version of myself. We're here to help our kids become the best version of themselves. And as we get into conflict areas, this common unchanging purpose becomes absolutely critical, very, very, very important. The next thing I would say is that, okay, we have this purpose, we understand our relation to each other, but then we go out into the world, and the world's crazy, right? And the culture is crazier every single day. And there's something that you have to understand as a parent. There's also something I think we have to understand in marriage today. And that is that as a parent, you are in a war with the culture. Okay? As a parent who loves his or her child or children and wants his or her child or children to become the best version of themselves, you are at war with the culture. Okay? And we never think of that. We never think of that. Parents don't talk about that. We're not told that. We don't think in those terms. Okay? Now, imagine you're at war. Let me tell you the easiest way to lose a war. The easiest way to lose a war is if you don't even know you're at war. Okay? That's where most parents are losing every single day. Most parents losing the cultural war every single day because they don't realize it's a war. You know? They might think I don't know what they think it is, but it is a war. Okay? Easiest way to lose a war? Not to know you're at war to start with. Okay? If you want to win a war, there are 3 very simple steps. Want to win a war? First thing you got to know is you're at war. Second thing you got to know is who's your enemy? Who is the enemy? And the reality is the culture, if you want to become the best version of yourself, if you want to have a vibrant marriage where you're helping each other become the best version of yourselves, and if you want to have a dynamic family where you're helping each other become the best version of themselves, the culture is at war with you, the culture is at war with your marriage, and the culture is at war with your family. I mean, seriously, when's the last time you watched television and you said to yourself, I'm so glad I watched that because I'm a better version of myself now, right? That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And so much of the content that we're consuming in the culture isn't helping us become the best version of ourselves. And it's not helping the kids become the best version of themselves. And we're in this war, only we haven't woken up to the reality that bombs are going off all around us. We haven't woken up to the reality that we are actually in the midst of the war. And it might sound a little bit depressing, but we'll come out of that in a minute here. If you want to win a war, you need 3 things. 1, you got to know you're at war. 2, you need to know who the enemy is. 3, you need to know what the strategies and resources you need to defeat that enemy. Okay? As a parent, you're at war with the culture. Okay? You need to know that. You're at war with the culture. You know who the enemy is. The culture is the enemy. And you need to know the strategies and resources that are disposable to you that can help you defeat that enemy. But the reality is that the culture is having an enormous impact on us, on our children, on our marriages, on our families. And at this point, the great majority of it isn't positive. And we're not asking, we're afraid to ask the most important questions of our time. Okay? We are afraid to ask the most important questions of our time. And I'll give you just a very simple one. And the very simple one is, are we better off? Are we better off because everybody has a smartphone in their pocket? Okay. Is the world a better place? Do we have better marriages? Do we have better families? Do we have better society? Do we have better culture because everyone has a smartphone? Okay. Now, the answer to the question isn't that important. The fact that we're not even asking the question says something about our relationship with the culture. Says something about our relationship with the culture. And the the reality is that there is an unconscious slavery. There is an unconscious just go with the flow that is very, very dangerous, and that we are about to discover that we don't want our kids walking through life like that. So I've walked you through an exercise. Don't expect you to do the exercise tonight, but I would encourage you to do the exercise at some point. Parents come to me all the time. They say, oh, I got this kid and this is going on and that's going on, and what should I do? You know, I always give exactly the same answer. I've been giving exactly the same answer for about 20 years. And what I say to them is, depending on the age of your children, sit down and write 2 or 3 sentences about what would you like your child to be like when your child is 15, 35, well, 15, 21, 35, and 50. They're the 4 time periods I give people. Just sit down some time and write down 3 or 4 sentences. Describe your child, how you would like your child to be when your child is 15, 21, 35, and 50. Now, when people do this, and sometimes I do this with audiences and I do it live, and then I'll have some people read, you know, the descriptions of how they envision their children growing up, or what they envision their children growing up to be and become. And when we do this, what we discover is none of us want our children to grow up and be the average 15-year-old. None of us want our children to grow up and be the average 21-year-old, 35-year-old. None of us say, hey, yeah, just give me the average 21-year-old. You know, my child's 7, but if you could just promise me you give me the average 21-year-old, I'd be great with that. None of us are comfortable with that. That's not our dream. That's not our vision. That's not our hopes, desires for our children. We want something different. Okay? But we're not pausing to ask ourselves, okay, we know we want something different for our children, but what is it? What is this different that we want? The answer is one that is uncomfortable for many, and that is we want our children to be countercultural. Okay? If we don't want our children to be the average 15-year-old, 21-year-old, 35-year-old, 50-year-old, what we're actually saying is we want our children to be different to the average, which is countercultural. And so then the question becomes, and I think the biggest challenge for parents in this age is, how do we teach our children to be comfortable being countercultural? Okay, how do we teach our children to be comfortable being countercultural? Next question I usually ask parents, and then we'll come back to that other question. I ask parents, what in your life is countercultural? Okay, what in your life is countercultural? If we had to convict you of being countercultural, if we had to gather a jury of your peers and convict you of being countercultural, what evidence would we be able to gather to convict you of being countercultural? Because if we couldn't gather enough evidence to convict you of being countercultural, the chances of your children being how you envision them being at 15, 21, 35, and 50 is almost 0. Because the essential ingredient, the special sauce, is teaching children to have a sense of self. And we teach children to have a sense of self only by stepping away, teaching them to step away from the peer groups, teaching them when they step away from their peer groups, they're actually stepping into themselves. You know, teaching them to step away from us as parents. When they step away from us as parents in a healthy way, they're stepping into themselves. A really healthy autonomy, a really healthy independence, a really healthy, you know, personal creativity. And of course, as parents, we're not necessarily comfortable with that either. And there's growing pains that come with, you know, accepting or allowing our children to take on that independence and autonomy and creativity. But the reality is that, you know, I don't know you as a group of people, but I've done enough work with YPO to know that, you know, you're doing extraordinary things. You've lived, you know, your journeys have been special. You know, you're not the average, you know. And what I know is that if you go back into your own journey, you will be able to identify times where you stepped away from your peer group. Okay. You stepped away from your peer group, you stepped away from the crowd, you stepped away from the culture, you know, and you said, hey, I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to be out drinking 6 nights a week. I'm going to study, or, you know, or I'm not going to go to college. I'm going to start a business. You know, there are these moments where people separate from the culture that are critically important to our development, and development of sense of self. And really the rejection of the culture, so that we can live in the culture, but we're not a slave of the culture. We can live in the culture, we can enjoy all the best of what it has to offer, but we're not owned by the culture. We're not a slave to the culture. We're not, you know, tied up by the culture in that kind of way. And so I think the biggest challenge for parents today is around this cultural war. The culture doesn't want your child to become the best version of himself, herself. Okay. The culture doesn't wake up in the morning and say it wants to help families, marriages, children become the best version of themselves. Okay. What's driving our consumption? What's driving our culture is consumption, you know, and the reality is consumption doesn't have a heart for people. Consumption doesn't say, oh yeah, I want you to consume the things that are best for you. I want you to consume the things that will help you become the best version of yourself. I only want you to consume the things that will help your family be the best version of itself. No, consumption doesn't think that way. Consumption doesn't think. That is left to us as human beings. And so we realize, okay, the job of a parent is enormous to help your child become the best version of himself or herself. And one of the things that makes it enormous is, while you're doing that, you're still trying to become the best version of yourself. You're still trying, you know, in a primary relationship or marriage to help each other become the best version of themselves. And so you've got these 3 tracks, and all of this is going on at the same time. And you're learning things about yourself through your kids' experience. And you realize, wow, why didn't I work that out 20 years ago? You know, it took my 7-year-old to teach me that. And that can be disorienting, and that can take away your confidence as a parent, but it shouldn't. Okay, and that's why you need that common purpose, because what's unchanging allows us to make sense of all change. Okay, I grew up in Australia. I've lived in America for about 20 years. I'm an American citizen now. I love America. You know, I remember the first time I came to America to speak. And I'd spoken in almost 50 countries before I came to the United States to speak. And it was like I stepped into a different universe. There's just something about the American spirit that I really connected with. And if you look at America, you look at what has allowed America to succeed and celebrate and dominate in so many different areas. You know, there are a lot of things, but one of the things is the Constitution, right? I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And have there been changes? Yes. You know, what, 27 in a couple hundred years or whatever it is. But if you think about that, you know, for 200 years, we've had this common unchanging purpose, so that when we have a disagreement, we look to, okay, what does the Constitution say? To have a conversation about whatever it is we're disagreeing about. It's good for a country. It's phenomenal for a couple and phenomenal for a family to have this common unchanging purpose. And so I can't impress upon you enough to take on the language of helping each other become the best version of yourselves as your common unchanging purpose. But you don't have to pick that. It might be something else for you, and that's fine. But decide what it's going to be and start to use this language among yourselves and with your children, and even beyond that, because it is a conversation that people hear and that people respond to. So we have this purpose for our family. We have this vision. You know, if you do the exercise, you think about, okay, what's my vision for my child at 15, 21, 35, and 50? We realize, okay, our vision is countercultural. It's an epiphany. You know, it's a moment of astounding clarity. Because from there, we can ask ourselves, all right, in what ways are we going to be countercultural? In what ways are we going to teach our children that it's okay to be countercultural? And here's the important piece. You have to do it in a way that's attractive, okay? Anybody can do it and look like a freak, okay? I kid you not. Anybody can be countercultural and look like a freak. Anyone can be countercultural and look like a weirdo. The key is to do it in a way that it's attractive, in a way that causes your children to ask questions, in a way that your children see, wow, that gives life to you. That is life-giving to you. Okay? So I share something with you. I don't usually share this, but I share it with you. We don't have television in our home. Okay? Now we have televisions and we have a theater, and you know, my wife and I will watch a TV show and we will, you know, watch a movie with the kids in the theater and that sort of thing. But we do not have television streaming into our home for two reasons. One, you know, I watched my father watch television every night. You know, my father came home from work every night. He had dinner. He sat down in front of the television set. He sat there until he went to bed, you know. I saw the impact that had on my parents' marriage. And I remember many times as a teenager coming down, sitting in the living room, my dad's watching a show, and me saying to him, listen, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. And Dad saying, well, listen, wait for the commercial, you know? And then the commercial come and, you know, we start talking. And of course, whatever it is I wanted to talk about wasn't going to get talked about in a commercial break. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, you know, being on the road, I go on the road a lot over the last, you know, 28 years. And, you know, get back to my hotel at night and you turn on the TV and start flicking through channels. It's just so easy to get sucked into. And what I realized is it brought a really negative energy into my life, you know? And so, you know, before we got married, my wife and I, we just agreed we're not going to have television in our house. Now, some people think we're crazy, you know, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with some people thinking I'm crazy. There's a long list of them, probably. But I will tell you one thing is people come to our house and they say, wow, your house is really peaceful. You know, why is your house so peaceful? And I don't think they're able to put together that, you know, some of these things are connected. That's one of the ways we've chosen to be countercultural. Okay. And, you know, our kids will say, well, why don't we have television? And, you know, I'll say things like, well, I like spending time with you guys. You know, if I'm watching TV all the time, I don't get to spend so much time with you. And I like talking to you and things like that. That doesn't have to be a way. I'm not proposing that. You know, I'd probably be lynched if I proposed that. But what I am saying is find a way to be countercultural so that it engages you and your kids in a conversation so that they understand that you're living life with intentionality, that you're not just doing everything that everyone else is doing because that's what everyone does. If you can give your children the gift and the courage to be countercultural, you give them the gift of stepping into themselves, to stepping into their power, to living out of this strong sense of self, and to really living in their power. And I think you know when you're living out of a strong sense of self, and you know when you're not. I know that I do. And we want that for our kids, right? You know, we want our kids to live in that way. And we can give our kids everything on the planet, you know, materially. We can give our kids the best education on money can buy. But at the end of the day, if we give our kids a strong sense of self and the courage to be countercultural, our children will flourish. And ultimately, that is what we want to see as parents. We want to see our children thriving. We want to see our children flourishing. We want to see them growing into themselves, becoming the best version of themselves. And so it's important to understand that you have this dream for your children. I think it's important to establish this common unchanging purpose. It's important to understand you're at war. The culture does not want for your child what you want for your child, okay? And so at some point you have to work out, okay, how are you going to play interference with the culture? You know, how are you going to allow your child to be exposed to the culture in a healthy way? And how are you going to speak to your child about, you know, what they're experiencing in the culture and being exposed to in the culture? I think is critically important. All of this is what it means to be a leader, right? I mean, we in our work, in our businesses, we think about leadership all the time, but all of this is what it means to be a leader, is to be thinking on a different level, to be thinking very strategically, to be acting very intentionally. You know, Napoleon is famously quoted or misquoted, or nobody knows who said it, as saying, those who fail to plan can plan to fail. And we absolutely know that's true in our business. You know, those who fail to plan in business can plan to fail. We know that's true. You know, the number of businesses that go out of business every year because they just don't have a plan is astounding. You know, it's true in our businesses, but it's also true for our lives as individuals. It's true for our marriages, and it is true for our families and our parenting. I think those who fail to plan can plan to fail. And the interesting thing is that the culture will tell you this is the plan you need for your child. And the plan you need for your child is to give them, you know, all the material things and buy the best education money can buy and, you know, study abroad and da, 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 da. But what is the goal that the culture is taking that child towards? We know not. You know, it's undefined. Nobody knows. Because the culture doesn't have a dream for your child. Culture doesn't have a dream for your child. You have a dream for your child. As a parent, as parents, you have a dream for your child, and that dream has to be celebrated and protected and defended, you know? And so we ask ourselves, okay, this can be overwhelming. Should it be overwhelming? No. You know, and I've done a lot of work over the last 30 years in addiction facilities. I wrote a book called The Rhythm of Life, which isn't about addiction or addiction recovery, but interestingly has been very, very popular in sort of the recovery movement. And so I'm very often invited to visit addiction centers or recovery centers. And, you know, they have a saying in AA, they have a saying, just do the next right thing, you know. As parents, very often, we have to live what we want our children to live. And our children will mirror us in lots of ways. If we start worrying about, you know, what college our kids will go to, you know, when they're 7 years old, our children will start worrying about way into the future at a very, very early age, you know. But, you know, the best preparation for any future reality is to give yourself over 100% to this moment right now. Okay? The present moment is the best preparation for any future reality, you know? And so when our children come to us and say, well, I'm worried about this or I'm worried about that, worried about an exam, let's say for an example, okay, do you know what you need to know? Are you doing the study? You know, if you don't know what you need to know, let's help you work out what you need to know. And then, you know, do you know how to study? If you don't know how to study, let's get someone to teach you how to study. And action then takes away, you know, much of those concerns, those anxieties, those worries. And so as a parent, even though we're painting this huge vision for being a parent, this huge vision for family, in our conversation tonight, I think as a parent, it's very important for you to understand that, okay, if you're overwhelmed, you're trying to do something that doesn't belong in this moment. Okay, that is universally true. If you're overwhelmed, you're trying to do something that doesn't belong in this moment. If you're overwhelmed, you're trying to take responsibility for something that isn't your responsibility. If you're overwhelmed, you're trying to do something that doesn't belong here and now. And so when we get overwhelmed, we have to ask ourselves, okay, what's the next right thing? Because that's what you want your kids to do. Okay. Life is choices. Period. Life is choices. Think about where you are today. Think about all the choices that got you where you are today. Some of them good, some of them bad, some of them absolutely disastrous. You know, and that's okay. That's life. Life is choices. Okay. And we think to ourselves, okay, common purpose, help each other become the best version of ourselves. How do you practically teach your kids how to do that? Teach them to become phenomenal decision makers. That's what you want to do. You want to teach your kids to be phenomenal decision makers. If I said to you, your kids will always make phenomenal decisions. If I said to you, I guarantee you, your kids will always make phenomenal decisions. How much would you worry about your kids? You wouldn't. You want your kids to become phenomenal decision makers. How do we teach our kids to become decision makers? By talking them through decisions, obviously by the decisions we make. They're watching the decisions we make. And they're sponges, right? So I have an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. My 5-year-old comes in last night for story time. They come to my office. I have them one at a time for about 15 minutes each every night. And they come in, and my 5-year-old comes in a couple of nights ago. His name's Ralph. And I said, Ralph, where you been? I said, what do you mean, Dad? I said, I've been waiting for 1,000 years. He said, that's impossible. I said, well, why is that impossible? He said, I'm only 5 years old. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you couldn't be waiting for me for 1,000 years because I'm only 5 years old. The most you can wait for me is 5 years. I said, how did you work that out? He said, that's called deductive reasoning, Dad. I'm like, oh my, he's 5 years old. It's like, our kids are smarter than us. They'll be smarter than us. They'll know things we don't know. They'll learn things faster than we ever learned them. They'll have access to knowledge and information and resources we never had access to, you know. And all of that can be very, very distracting. But ultimately, what are we trying to teach them to do? How to make great decisions. Okay. How to make great decisions. Are you making a decision that will help you become the best version of yourself? Are you making a decision that will help other people become the best version of themselves? This is ultimately, as parents, what we are trying to do. And so when we get overwhelmed, we have to come back into the moment. And we say, okay, what's the next right thing? What's the best thing I can do for me right now? What's the best thing I can do for my marriage right now? What's the best thing I can do for my family right now? What's the best thing I can do for this particular individual child right now? Just do the next right thing, because that is how we forge a future. That is how we forge a destiny. We know that in our business. You know, people look at people who are successful in business and say, oh, how did that ever happen? It happened one decision at a time. You know, it happened one moment at a time. It happened 1 hour of hard work at a time. And that's how you built your business life. And that's how we build marriages, that's how we build children, that's how we build families. That's how it works, you know? And so can the macro vision be overwhelming? Yes. Can the idea that, oh, we're at war with the culture be overwhelming? Yes. But surely that's healthier than being in a war and not knowing you're in a war, you know? Because I don't think there's any parent out there who would say, yeah, I'd be quite happy for the culture to adopt my child and bring my child back to me when my child's 21 and just take care of my child. No, none of us as parents want that for our children, you know? And so the idea that we're at war with the culture as parents trying to raise our children with love and care and concern, compassion, empathy, and generosity, you know, it might be a little bit of a shock to the system, but it's a reminder of something we already knew deep down. It is not some grand revelation that we have to go off and think about or study forever and ever. The last thing I'll say before we open it up to Q&A, which I must say is my favorite part of anything, especially in a world of Zoom. But the last thing I will say is that, you know, where we started, before you're a mother, before you're a father, before you're a husband, before you're a wife, before you're a business leader, before you're anything else, you're a human being. And one thing that is undeniable about human beings is that we need, okay? We have needs. There are 4 aspects of the human person: physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. You've got needs in all of those 4 areas. You've got needs physically, emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Work out what your needs are, okay? If you're married, work out what your partner's needs are. Help your partner work out what his or her needs are. Work out what they are. They're real. They're not going away. They're legitimate, okay? In a marriage, my needs are valid. They're real. They're important. My wife's needs are valid. They're real. They're important. In a relationship where people love and honor each other, my wants are never more important than my wife's needs, and vice versa. When we start putting our wants ahead of our partner's needs, that's when our relationships begin to fall apart. When we start putting our wants ahead of our children's needs, that's when our families start falling apart. Not necessarily our families, but families across society and around society. We think, because our culture tells us, if you get what you want, then you'll be happy. We all want to be happy because it's in our DNA. We're created for happiness, you know, so we strive for happiness, we chase happiness, we obsess about happiness. And our culture says, get what you want, then you'll be happy. The problem is that doesn't work. Getting what you want doesn't make you happy. You know that. I know that. We've had that experience. There'll be plenty of times where we thought, you know what, if I get what I want, if I get this, or if I get that, the car, the house, the girl, whatever, then we'll be happy, you know, and we get it all. And then we realize, okay, well, I'm not as happy as I thought I would be, or it didn't last for as long as I thought it would. And so, you know, the entrepreneur in us says, okay, bigger, better, more. That's where our head goes. Bigger, better, more. If that didn't make me happy, bigger, better, more will make me happy. And so we chase bigger, better, more. And sometimes these cycles can last a decade. We can spend a decade chasing what we want, thinking getting what we want will make us happy. And we come to the end of the decade, we realize, oh, that didn't work. What will work? Bigger, better, more. We spend another decade chasing bigger, better, more, thinking if we get what we want, then we'll be happy. And that doesn't work. Why? Because getting what you want doesn't make you happy. Okay? It just doesn't. You've had that experience. You know that to be true. Why doesn't it make us happy? Because you never can get enough of what you don't really need. It's impossible. Okay, not difficult. I know we all like a challenge, but I'm not talking about difficult. I'm talking about impossible. You simply never can get enough of what you don't really need. Okay. And the crisis of happiness in our culture is that we're so obsessed about what we want, but what we want is secondary to what we need. And so what I would say to you is, as an individual, work out what you need. As a couple, work out what you need in order to thrive. Because what you need is so much more important than what you want. Okay, so much more important than what you want. And if you give each other that gift, you know, you will be giving your children a phenomenal gift. You give each other that gift. If you say, teach me about what your needs are, okay, teach me how to help you in your needs. I'm not going to be able to fulfill your needs all the time. Nobody is. That's not reality. Nobody can have all of their needs fulfilled all the time. You know, a woman has a baby, she doesn't sleep for, I don't know, 21 years or something. It's like sleep deprivation. That's real. That's part of being a mother. That's a need, but there are other needs that can be fulfilled. And there's something about having that baby that fulfills a woman in a different way. So what are your needs, and how can we help each other fulfill our needs is an incredible gift. I said that would be the last thing I would say, but I'm going to say one more thing that came to my mind before we open for Q&A. And that is, don't try to give your kids an easy life. Okay? Don't try to give your kids an easy life. Why? Well, a few reasons. One, you will fail. Okay? You will fail, and you will fail miserably. You'll fail outrageously and diabolically. And the reason is because life isn't meant to be easy. You know, life is difficult. Okay? It is a fundamental truth. Life is difficult. I don't care how good you've got it. I don't care what success you've had. Everybody you will ever meet is carrying a burden. Okay? It is an unspoken burden. We don't walk around with signs on our heads that say, I just lost my job. My wife just said she doesn't love me anymore. We just lost a baby. My business just went bankrupt. You know, just found out my dad has cancer. You know, we don't walk around with signs on us, but every single person we ever meet is carrying a heavy burden. Life isn't easy. It isn't supposed to be easy, you know, and the worst mistake we can make as parents is trying to give our kids an easy life. What's the antidote to that? Teach our kids to meet challenges. You know, teach our kids when life is difficult, teach our kids how to deal with the difficulty of life, because that's the only way to prepare them to live a life that is independent and autonomous and beautifully rich, separate from us as their parents. Even as painful as that idea might be to us at some point, that is the gift of parenting, you know? So hopefully, you know, we've covered us so much in an hour. I mean, just tons of ideas. I'm always just trying to give a couple, hopefully one that resonates with you and that you're able to take away and use practically. I think at this point, we're going to open it to some Q&A. It's a great question. I don't know how it came about. I started with my son, my eldest, Walter. I work hard, you know, I work a lot. I love work. I do work mostly from home, even, you know, forever. But there's just something about, at the end of the day, having, you know, some one-on-one time with my child that was, it was just important to me. And then as more came along, it remained important to me. It's interesting how it's different with each child. You know, Walter he's very, he's sort of an old soul, you know? So like one of the things I'd say to like Walter maybe is like, well, how was your day? And he'll like walk me through things. And then he's one of these kids who'll be like, well, how was your day, Dad? You know? And I remember this one particular night, I'd had just a shocking day. And And I said, you know what, Walter? He was only about 7. I said, you know, I had a really tough day today. And he said, well, what happened? And I said, well, I got this guy at work who just won't do his job. He just won't do his job. And Walter's like, well, you should fire that guy. And I'm like, well, you know, I've been thinking about that, but I was thinking maybe I should like sit him down first and have a chat with him, you know? He said, oh, that's a good idea. And then he said to me, he said, well, what do you think he's doing if he's not doing his job? I said, I don't know. He said, what do you think he's doing? Well, maybe he's in his office playing video games all day long. I said, maybe he could be doing that. It's probably not doing that. Walter said, why don't you sneak down near his office and look in there and see what he's doing during the day? And so, I mean, you have these fascinating conversations, I think, with the kids over the years. And I think it is a time I just love talking to them. I love asking them questions. I always ask them, like, what questions do you have for Daddy tonight? I always ask them, do you have any problems? I always say to them, almost every night until they're like 7, I say, if you ever have a problem, what do? You come and see Daddy, and Daddy will help you fix it, you know? And then as they're able to articulate it, they always default to, if I say to them, okay, if you have a problem, what do? They always default to, I come and see Daddy and Daddy will fix it. I say, no, that's not what Daddy says. If you ever have a problem, you come and see Daddy and Daddy will help you fix it, you know? And so it's just things like that. And I mean, another one I use every night, I tell them every night, I say, no matter what, no matter where, no matter when, Daddy always loves you. You know, there's nothing you can do that will stop Daddy from loving you, you know? And so whatever you've done, you can always come and talk to Daddy. It doesn't matter. I just think it's just so important. I think we live in a culture of shame. And I think that, I think children get shame very early. And I think it's very dangerous because it creates enormous blockage in communication with the people who can most help them in many, many scenarios and situations. So I love that time at night. It's absolutely precious. I have so many great memories. And then we do have story time, but I don't read books. I ask them to tell me the characters, give me 2 characters, and then I'll make a story up based on those 2 characters. And I mean, depending on what's happened during the day and, you know, how the evening routine is going with all of them, you know, sometimes the story is 2 minutes long and sometimes the story is 10 minutes long. But, you know, that's the best time of my day. I mean, it's golden. But there are a lot of days when I don't feel like it. There's a lot of days when, you know, it would be easy to blow it off. There's a lot of days when, and it's interesting. It's like, I think it's for them, but like many things, you know, in many ways, they just love on us and they just, you know, encourage us and raise us up and all that sort of thing. So that's the evening time. I mean, I started speaking and writing when I was 19. I got married when I was 35, you know, so later than most people. I mean, I'd seen the world, I mean, in just so many ways. And obviously I've been very successful. I mean, I have a number of businesses, apart from my speaking and my writing, and involved in nonprofits and I think with success comes efficiency. And children are not efficient. You know, they're not interested in efficiency. They're not interested in schedules. They're not interested. And so my life was very regulated before I got married, before I had kids. And then the kids come along and they disrupt this. They're not efficient. So But that was very good for me. I mean, it was, I think, painful at first because I'm driven and I mean, I just don't waste time. I mean, I'm like probably many people here on the call. And then I think it was very good for me because it took away sort of some of the rigidity of my personality and the inflexibility of my personality, and made me realize, well, there's some of the most wonderful moments you know, in my book, 7 Levels of Intimacy, I call it carefree timelessness. I call it basically time without an agenda is the magic of relationships. It's why people fall in love. It's why young people fall in love so easily, is because they have carefree timelessness. And the reason we fall out of love, you know, and I use the term very loosely, but the reason sort of the dynamic nature of our relationship, you know, fades is because we don't have this carefree timelessness. We don't have time together without an agenda. We might say, hey, honey, let's spend an hour together on Thursday afternoon, and we're going to return this and do that and do this other thing and that other thing. Well, that's not carefree timelessness. That's a lot of agenda that we put into our time. And so I think kids teach us, you know, the power of carefree timelessness. Certainly taught me. And I think the other thing they teach us is we've got a lot of illusions. You know, I had a lot of illusions about efficiency and effectiveness and, you know, whatever. We've got illusions. We've also got delusions, all of us, and they're different things. And but reality is constantly bumping up against our illusions. Okay, and something has to give. Either we let go of our illusions, or, you know, they crush us. You know, so we either allow reality to crush our illusions, or our illusions will crush us. And I think that, you know, in parenting, you know, we have so many ideas, right? When we're single, we become a parent and we just realize, well, life doesn't work that way, you know? I mean, I've negotiated $100 million contracts that were easier to negotiate than negotiating with my 5-year-old daughter to have a bath. You know, that's just the reality. And it's educational and it's humbling, I guess. So I think that for me, that was probably one of the biggest things. I'm such efficiency in my life, and kids don't fit into that. They're not meant to. We're meant to respond to them differently. So I would say a few things. Firstly, I think it's very important for you as parents. Your kids are 14, 16, 19, and 21. Is that correct? I think it's very important for you as parents to understand that what I've shared with you tonight comes from the wisdom of 2021. Okay? My eldest child is 11. And, you know, I think that, you know, when your kids were first getting into social media, we had no idea the impact this was going to have on the world. Okay? I think it's very important that you be mindful of that. Otherwise, I think you could be very harsh on yourself. I would say it's very unlikely that any of my children will have social media accounts, you know, while they're living in this home. I mean, I have professional accounts. My wife does not have any social media accounts. I don't have personal accounts, so to speak. I don't put photos of my family on my social media. I don't put photos of my kids on my social media. I don't, you know, that's not what I use social media for. And the truth is, I mean, my social media is being managed by experts. You know, I'm not like I'm sitting here thinking, well, I wonder what I should tweet tonight, you know? So, you know, I think but that is an easy thing for me to say, knowing what we know in 2021 with my eldest child being 11 years old. Okay. I think that given where you are and potentially where others are on the call, what I would say is like anything that, you know, you're a suspect of or you're concerned about, go into that with your kids. Have conversations with that. Ask them questions. You know, great teachers ask questions. You know, there's a difference between you know, great teachers and a teacher that just stands up and just talks all the time. You know, great teachers ask questions. You know, and I think to ask your kids, you know, what do you think about that? How did that make you feel? You know, how would you feel if that happened to you? You know, or if that happened to you, do you think you'd come and talk to me? You know, and they say, and you say, you know, I really hope that if you ever got in a situation like that, that you would come to talk to me, because I'd really want you to come and talk to me. I just think you just got to talk to kids, you know, and you know, I know how difficult that is. I know they get into this phase, but like we said earlier, you've got to have a strategy. Like if that was your business, you wouldn't just let them give you the cold shoulder and let 10 years pass and hope that they'll talk to you again when they're 25, right? I mean, you would have a strategy. One thing I share with parents all the time is get your kids into nature, okay? Kids are never bored with nature, okay? You give kids, I mean, my kids are spoiled, okay? I won't pretend otherwise. We're privileged. My kids are spoiled, okay? They're not necessarily spoiled because what we give them, but the stuff that comes from other people is just astounding, you know? And it's grandparents and friends and just people all over the place. And they get a new toy and they're like bored with it in like 5 minutes. But I tell you what, you take them to the beach. You never take a kid to the beach and they're bored in 5 minutes, right? Because nature's not boring, you know? And so I think to disconnect them from the technology, to get them into nature, to get them into a scenario where they will talk, you know, take them for a long drive, take them for a hike, take them wherever you've got to take them to get them away from it all and just get them talking. I think it's so important. And, but I say fearful. I think I am fearful of their teenage years, you know, because I just think that it is a very, very difficult time for them. It's so different than when I was a kid, you know, it's so different than when we were teenagers. And they're not ready for it. They think they are, but they have no idea. They're not ready for it. But I would just say, talk to your kids, ask your kids questions and invite them to ask you questions. You know, one of my favorites is one of the favorite exercises I do with the kids is I tell them, pick an age. I'm 47. And I say that to them. I say, I'm 47. Pick a number under 47. And I'll tell you what my life was like when I was that age. And then I always tell them like one thing that was great that I really loved about that age. And I always tell them one thing that I struggled with and how I would do it differently, you know, and what I learned from doing it, you know. In Australia, our Native American people are called Aborigines. The Aboriginal people. And there's a person in the tribe, in a tribe of Aborigines, they have different roles. And there's a person who's called the Keeper of the Dreams. Okay. And the Keeper of the Dreams is responsible for holding the stories of the tribe. And this person, they sit at the campfire and the Keeper of the Dreams will tell the stories of the tribe, you know. Your kids need to hear your stories. You know, they need to hear your stories about your success. They need to hear stories about your failure, even much more than they need to hear about your success. And you are the Keeper of the Dreams. And to sometimes we're like, I want my kids to talk to me. I want my kids to talk to me. I want my kids to talk to me. That's fine. Talk to your kids. You know, talk to your kids. They're listening. We know they're listening. Just talk to your kids. They'll start talking eventually. So, and the other thing I would say, like, these questions are such good questions. It's like the fact that you're even asking these questions just points to the reality that you love them, you care for them, and, you know, they're blessed to have you. So it's a phenomenal question. Okay. And it is, I mean, it's just perfect. It's just perfect. Okay. And it's not about the cell phone. It's got nothing to do with the cell phone, actually. Okay. We have a concept of, in our culture, of midlife crisis, right? Everyone talks about like midlife crisis. It's a real thing. You know, there are certain things that people experience around midlife. That's fairly universal. A lot of people experience it. How we react to it is individual, but why do we call it a midlife crisis? You know, why isn't it a midlife opportunity? You know, because I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about this, and I actually think like the midlife experience is a midlife opportunity. Okay. What's happening with, I think you said your daughter, is that right? 12-year-old daughter. You're seeing it as a crisis. Okay. I see it as an opportunity. And the reason I see it as that is because you think about school, right? It's the most unnatural thing in the world. Okay. It's the most unnatural thing we experience in our lives. It's the only time in our lives where we spend all of our time with a group of people who are the same age and just as stupid as we are. What our culture does is it alienates this ignorance, okay? Alienates this ignorance from the wisdom of the tribe, okay? Because we need the wisdom of the tribe to thrive, to flourish. I need to talk to my parents. I need to hear from my grandparents. I need to see my baby sister. We need the wisdom of the tribe, okay? What our culture does is it alienates these ages because that's where they're easily manipulated, okay? Churches will invite me to come and speak to the youth group. I say, no. I'll come and speak to your church if the youth group attends with the rest of the community, because it's unnatural to separate these kids and you just create a peer pressure environment. Whereas if the youth group comes with the community, there's no peer pressure in that environment. It's a community experience. So I see it as an opportunity. The sooner your daughter realizes that she can do something completely different to all of her peers, and she will not only be okay, but she will be better off, okay, the better. Now, do you win that battle with this one? I don't know. But I do know, I can look back at my life, and I do know that stepping away from my peer group is just so important to developing a sense of self. I know I would not be sitting here talking to you tonight if by some miracle or grace or fate or destiny or whatever, I hadn't stepped away from my peer group at very specific times in very significant ways and been okay with that, you know? So I think that it's important that you don't see it as a crisis, that you see it as an opportunity. I think it's important that you keep a goal in mind, okay? What do you want? If you had to choose between having your daughter like you and respect you, which would you choose? Okay. And the answer in the long run is respect. Okay. It's like, what do I do here that will have my child respect me forever? You know? And I'm telling you, it's a delayed gratification, long view play that most parents simply do not have the strength of character to step into. Okay. And, you know, we all had teachers in school who let us do anything we want. You know, did we like that at the time? Sure, we liked that at the time. You know, we goof off for a class and, you know, whatever. But we don't 30 years later say, oh, he was a great teacher. I really respected him. You know, we just don't. You ask people like, tell me about the best boss you ever had, the best coach you ever had, any of that. What do they universally say? This person was tough but fair. this person had my best interest at heart. I knew this person, wanted what was good for me. And ultimately, I mean, that is love. I mean, love is to will the good of the other. Okay, to will the good of the other. So, like you describe it like, and you're self-deferential in the sense of say, we think we're doing the right thing. No, you are doing the right thing. Don't be confused about that, because the love is to will the good of the other. There's nothing in what you're doing that doesn't will the good of your 12-year-old daughter. Okay, it's like it's powerful. Will it be hard for her? Yes. That's okay. Life isn't meant to be easy. Isn't your job to make her life easy? And as soon as she works that out, and the more she's able to deal with difficulties, the better she'll be able to deal with life, and all the difficulties that will come in life. And so don't look at it as a crisis, look at it as an opportunity, and just constantly tell her, we love you, and hold her. I mean, young women at this age, 12, 13, 14, 15, they need to be held. They need to be touched. They need to be loved. They need to be encouraged. There's a beautiful line in the Talmud, the Jewish writings. It says, each blade of grass has its own angel that leans over it and whispers, grow, grow, grow. And I just think of about that idea with our kids, right? I mean, that's our role as parents. It's just to just be constantly leaning into our children and whispering in their ears, grow, just grow, 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 grow. We love you. So I just don't second guess yourself. You know your heart here. I can tell by listening to you, you know your heart. Don't second guess yourself, and help keep each other strong. No, and I think we go through stages, and we, the last thing I said to the other couple, keep each other strong, because we both have moments of weakness. We both have moments of doubt. We both have moments of insecurity. We both have moments of, okay, are we doing the right thing? Are we helping our kids, or are we wounding our kids? And I think that it's important that we do remind each other of, okay, why are we doing this? When we each have those moments, and we do each have those moments, and we aren't always on the same page all the time. And that's why, we talked earlier about how important it is to have a healthy conflict, how important it is to disagree, and to disagree in a way that is very respectful, and that you need that common unchanging purpose to do that, because otherwise it's just my personal preferences against your personal preferences. It's what I want versus what you want. And there's always going to be a war then, and unless we're coming together and saying, okay, we want something together that is more important than our personal preferences, which I think is what that common purpose does. It says, we want this, I want to help you become the best version of yourself more than I want my personal preferences. And I mean, in the corporate world, my last book was called The Culture Solution. And this is the problem in corporate culture. Corporate culture has essentially become a collection of personal preferences. And that's not culture. So now we've got bring your dog to work, and, unlimited vacation, and all these sorts of crazy things that really have nothing to do with culture at all. They're just personal preferences, or, passing fads, or that sort of thing. And as parents, we have to get beyond our personal preferences. We have to get beyond the passing fads, and we have to ask ourselves, okay, what is our long view? Because we know that success lies in the long view. It doesn't matter what you're talking about. Want to be successful at saving and investing, got to take the long view. Want to be successful as a parent, in marriage, in business, in anything, pick anything. You have to take the long view. And I think that's especially true in parenting. And my wife and I, we disagree. I want you to know that. It's very important to me that you know that. I don't want you to think I'm living in some idyllic Disneyland over here. And I also don't want you to think that I'm over here dictating my views to my wife. You know, we absolutely disagree on things, and sometimes we deal with it in a healthy way, and sometimes we don't. You know, it's pretty normal over here at the Kelly house. In many ways. I mean, in some ways it's not, obviously. My kids are living a life of privilege that I never lived. I mean, I've been phenomenally successful, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but I think that is nothing compared to the things we're talking about tonight. I mean, it's such a beautiful conversation, I think, for us to have. And as I said, when I got the invitation, I say no to 95% of invitations I get at this point. This is part of the reason, because I want to spend the evenings with my kids, but and I don't want to travel and be away from my family and that sort of thing. But when I got this invitation, I thought, absolutely, I'm absolutely going to do that. And I'm really honored that you invited me to do this tonight. So my 5-year-old, we talked about Ralph a little earlier. If I ask him, how was school? He'll say the usual, and kids get into this pattern, right? They get into this pattern of answering. And so you have to mix the questions up. I think to be very specific, I think is good. So like, what's the best thing that happened to you today? And that will say something. And you'll be surprised some days at what they say. And I'll tell you, it'll break your heart some days what they say. I remember, when my daughter was like, I don't know, 6 years old, like threw this just fabulous party for her and her girls and her girlfriends and all this sort of thing. And then at the end of the day, I asked her, like, what was the best thing that happened today? And it was like something completely unrelated. I can't even remember what it was, but it was like, wow, I'm not even going to tell my wife what my daughter just said. She spent like 3 weeks planning this birthday party. And it was this other thing that was like the most important thing, the best thing that happened to her in the day. So I think things like that. I think, bullying's big in school. So at the moment, so we don't have a big problem at our school, but I never ask them, is someone bullying you? Firstly, I just don't use that word, but I would never ask them, like, is anyone being mean to you at school? I would ask them, like, is anyone being mean to, are any of the kids being mean to any of the other kids at school? Because they'll much easily talk about somebody else than they will about themselves when it comes to something like that, And so I asked my daughter, she's 9. I asked my daughter about a month ago, I said, is any of the kids being mean to the other kids at school? And she said, oh yes, this one boy is hitting these 2 girls, And I said, well, what does he do? And she said he just walks up to them and it just punches them in the arm and then walks away. And then my wife said to me the next day, she said, oh, Isabel's got a couple of bruises on her arm. Did she say anything to you about that? I said, well, she said, and she gave the boy's name. She said, this boy has been like punching the girls, And so I think if I would have said to Isabel, like, is anyone being mean to you at school? I'm not sure she would have said anything, But then I was able to have a conversation and we were able to get to the bottom of it. So I think things like that, if you can, the direct question very often makes them feel cornered, makes them feel trapped, makes them feel, in the hot seat. It's chess, right? It's like, what are the 3 moves that get you to where, the heart of the matter? What are the 3 questions that lead into, the question that you really want to ask? I think is is what I've learned. And I mean, questions are a big part of my life. I did not realize it until a few years ago. Like, I got a call from somebody. They were doing a dissertation on my book, The Rhythm of Life. Rhythm of Life is 313 pages long, and it has, I think it has 327 questions in it. And this person was doing this dissertation on the questions in the book. So questions are, I write a lot of questions. I think a lot about questions. I just think it is an art form that needs to be learned. And the other thing is, like, I'd pick up some of these books. I've got like these books or these sets of cards, like conversation starters with kids, and I use them, you know, and they're brilliant, you know. And it's like, I mean, I've got them around here somewhere. You go on Amazon, you find them easy enough. But I think just, we don't have to be the experts in everything, you know. It's like, if someone sat down and thought about what are 100 really good conversation starters with kids and put them on a deck of cards, let's grab one for $5.99. And I mean, that's the best $5.99 you ever spent. I use that stuff all the time. I love that stuff, because none of us have the time to sit around and think about this stuff all the time. So questions, I think there will be some of my thoughts. Hope that's helpful. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. He doesn't know because he never did it. And so he's just projecting onto that experience. If I tell you, yeah, you know, it's easier to raise kids poor, are you going to give all your money away and all your stuff away and live a life of poverty because it's easier to raise your kids that way? I think not. So the hypothetical question doesn't really matter. You know, the reality is, if you're a person of means, you know, is what it is, you know, and I believe that it is what it is for a reason, you know. I think that the world needs a different class of rich people. You know, I think the world needs a different class of people of wealth that live with a different consciousness, that think about it differently, you know. And so I would say, hey, if you're rich and you're a person of means or a person of wealth, raise your kid to be very uniquely that in the world, you know. Don't raise your kid to be like one of these trust fund kids, because we've seen enough of them over the last 50 years. But take that opportunity to say, okay, this is an incredible opportunity. It is a blessing and a burden, but let's get after it and let's teach our kids how to do that properly. Because, I mean, heavens knows the world needs it, right? The world desperately needs it. And so, you know, let's give the world some people of wealth who are also people of substance in the very real sense of the word, is what I would say. Yeah, absolutely. So a few things. One is, you know, you got a child that's 2 and a 5-month-old. Is that what you said? Okay. So firstly, don't delay. Okay. Parents think they've got all this time. This is your time. Okay. By the time your child is 7, 8, you know, who your child is just so clear, and so much of who they are is set in cement, you know. These years are very, very, very important. And so don't put it off, you know. Think about these things, be intentional about these things. They're very, very important. If you get deeper into it and you think about, okay, what do you want your child to be like at 15 or 21 or 35 or 50? You know, in very broad terms, you know, you don't want your child to be like a lying, stealing, cheating, thieving type of person, right? You want your child to be an honest person, to be a person of integrity, to be a person of character. Okay. And so if we reverse engineer that, if we take, okay, a person of great integrity, a person of great character, and we reverse engineer that and we say, okay, we want to build a person of great integrity and great character. How do we do that? How do we build that person? The building blocks of a person of great integrity and great character is virtue. Okay. Now, I do not mean virtue in the religious sense. I'm not opposed to virtue in the religious sense, but I want to make the point so that it makes sense to people who are interested in religion or not interested in religion, because the point can be made either way. I'll talk about virtue in the Greek sense. Okay. So if you think of classical Greek virtue, things like patience, generosity, kindness, compassion, you know, do you want your daughter at 21 to be a generous person or a stingy person? That's an easy answer. Do you want your daughter at 35 to be a patient person or an impatient, you know, arrogant, throwing tantrums type of person? That's an easy answer. So the building blocks of your child's life are virtues. Okay. You want your child to have patience, courage, generosity. Put the list together and parent towards those virtues. And what you'll discover is that they test your own virtue. They challenge your own virtue. You realize, you know, how impatient we are. You realize how selfish we are at sometimes. And so I really would go into that much more specific level of saying, okay, and even to envision particular situations and even situations in your own life and say, okay, in this situation, how would I like my child to respond? Would I like my child to do this, or like my child to do that? Because if you're able to envision that, you're able to parent towards that in ways that are, I think, very, very powerful and very, very practical. Other thing you said, and then a couple of other people have said it, you know, talk about our parents or our own childhood or that sort of thing. You know, the Swedish psychologist Carl Jung, he said, the worst thing, he basically, this is paraphrasing, but he basically said the worst thing a parent can do for a child is to burden them with our own unlived life. Okay. So there are things that you wanted for your life that never came about. We shouldn't burden our children with our unlived life. You know, they have their own life to live. They are their own person. And we have to find ways to encourage that and celebrate and grow that. But this is a magical time for you. Your kids are tiny, and it's a fantastic time to think about these things, because too many parents come to me when the kid is 15 or 17, and it's like, what do I do? Do you know what I mean? And it's a very difficult time to get through to kids. And I would say, now take this time now to really think about this, to really dream and get intentional about your parenting. Yeah, so it's a great question. You know, kids have heard you when they start mimicking you. Okay, so you think about business, you think about branding, and you think about what we know in branding, and then you think about like leadership in business, and how often a leader will say, well, I told him. You know, how many times have I got to tell him? Well, you got to tell him more than once. You know, we know that with branding, but when we're leading people, we forget that. We think we can just tell them once. Yeah, well, what would have happened to Coca-Cola if in 1856 they put up one billboard that said Coca-Cola, and then when Coca-Cola flopped, people said, well, what happened to Coca-Cola? Well, we told them once. You know, I don't know what's wrong with people, because we told them once. People don't hear things. You know, the first time you tell somebody something, they're distracted. They don't hear it. Second time you tell somebody something, they catch the end of it. The third time you tell somebody something, you know, they think, wow, this must be important because this is the second time she's telling me this. You know, the fourth time you tell somebody something, they hear it through the lens of their own self-interest. Fifth time they ask a question, you think they're engaged. They're not engaged. They're just questioning you, really, and your leadership. The sixth time you tell somebody a question, tell somebody something, they hear it the way you want it to be heard. You know, you've got to tell people things many, many times. We know that through branding. It's true in leading people in a business environment, and it's true in parenting children. What I would say is mix it up, you know, and questions are much more important than statements, because questions live in people's minds, you know. I think, we talked about the questions at night before they go to bed. I didn't talk about this one, probably because it's just so close to me. But, one thing, I think one question you can ask them is like, what's one thing you did today that helped you become a better version of yourself? And that's so powerful, because, very often we can focus on the negative, what they're not doing to become a better version of themselves, or what they're doing that's not helping them become a better version of themselves. But what you want to build in a child is confidence and the sense of self, and the idea that they can do things that help them become the best version of themselves. And to get them to be mindful of, okay, well, when you did that, how did that feel? How do you feel about yourself when, let's say, what's one thing you did today that helped you become a better version of yourself? And your kid says, well, there was this child at lunch and nobody was sitting with her. So I went over and sat with her and I talked to her and, well, what did you learn about her? Well, I learned that she just moved to this city and she used to live in Chicago and whatever. And then it's like, well, how did you feel when you did that? Well, I felt nervous at first when I went over there, but after I did it, I felt really happy. I felt good. And help them to recognize that warm glow. Help them to recognize the feelings that accompany this thing. Because I think that just breaking it down to that DNA level is so important. It's like, do we want to work out? No. Do we feel like working out? No. Are we always glad we worked out once we worked out? Yes. How do we teach our kids that? Only by getting them to recognize that. Only by getting them to recognize, did you want to go and work out? No, I didn't want to go work out. And when you got done working out, were you glad you worked out? Yes, I was glad I worked out. That's life. That's all of life is right there. Because, we didn't talk about this. I talk about it in the book, but you can basically measure a person's ability to succeed at anything if you measure their ability to delay gratification. Okay. You can't have a successful marriage if you can't delay gratification. You can't be successful in your personal finances, in your health, in your career, in parenting, in anything. We will be successful in life to the extent that we are willing and able to delay gratification. And we live in a culture where instant gratification isn't fast enough anymore. That's what our children are constantly immersed in. And so one of the things we are trying to teach them is how to delay gratification, and that there is rewards to delaying gratification, not only external rewards, but internal rewards. It's like, how did you feel afterwards? Okay, yes, when I walked over there, I felt nervous to walk over there and sit with that kid. Why did you feel that way? Well, I didn't know what my friends would say, or I just didn't know what she would be like, or whatever. Get them to understand that. And then, okay, how did you feel after? I felt great. I felt good about myself, Just it's complex, but it's also not. It's simple in some ways, but we complicate it, I guess. I don't know. Hi, I'm Matthew Kelly. Thank you for watching. Every day we're releasing new videos and videos from the archives of the last 30 years. So click the button below and subscribe so that you can get notifications and be aware of all the great content that can have a powerful impact on your life.